And
Guys,
I can't believe this is my
this is my NWA.
So
This is my FBI NWA moment. The Department of Homeland Security has funded woke activists, feminists at ASU to deliver a report to them to do
criminology.
to do like actual actionable things.
I'm taking a class
Because I talk about body count. Oh no,
That's
the
insane.
horror.
For over a decade, the American government has taken the position and released reports claiming right-wingers are the most dangerous threat to America as a whole. There have been many examples of this leading back to at least Barack Obama's administration, when the shift from potential Islamic threats were replaced with the claim that white supremacy is the US biggest domestic threat. Well folks, the government has taken it even a step further this time, and now manosphere and red pill content is being investigated by the government.
So this is massive. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security paid nearly $700,000 to a counterterrorism NGO to intercept and divert Twitter X traffic away from specific individuals in the manosphere. Those people were the Rational Male, Cobra Tate, Fresh and Fit Pod, among others, whatever podcast, were specifically named as targets. The DHS Department of Homeland Security TVTP grant funding was given to Arizona State University, home of the McCain Institute. The purpose of the grant was to design a native tool to be used on Twitter to effectively suppress individuals in the manosphere by diverting their audiences away from their content towards counter-messaging content, websites, podcasts, and creators curated by the McCain Institute to counter quote unquote hate speech and misinformation. The US government has named the manosphere as one of the biggest terror threats facing the US. They claim this broad network is the main cause of extremely isolated acts of incel-related violence. The conflation, hold on, okay. The conflation of incels with the broader manosphere as a justification for targeted counter-terrorism operations, which can include aggressive surveillance and censorship, is part of a disturbing trend. The ever-broadening definitions of terrorism and extremism put forth by the U.S. government poses a very real threat to the constitutional rights of law-abiding citizens. Even worse, the grant application resulting reports suggest a large-scale collaboration of tech giants, NGOs, and U.S. government agencies to design and implement tools to counter hate and disinformation by diverting web traffic from specific individuals and communities deemed harmful. What is a harmful content according to the U.S. government? White supremacy, anti-government views, foreign terror organizations, i.e. ISIS, and the manosphere are the top 4 terror threats according to the McCain Institute.
Now, is this government overreach or have I gone crazy? Certain dating content and even a person's body count are now things the government wants us to stop talking about. We really are on the path to societal collapse when the government is now spending likely millions of dollars to investigate people who think promiscuity might have a negative consequence for those that partake in it and society as a whole. It really is no wonder some people think we are living in the modern day Sodom and Gomorrah. Regardless of your take on promiscuity, how is this ever something the government should spend money on researching and trying to get private companies to limit their reach, regardless of how popular the content is? Clearly both sides listen to this podcast, as those who come on and debate on both sides say as much. Given that we have now stepped into the literal twilight zone, I think people need to be aware of just how insidious and dangerous this action by the government is. Shortly after the 9/11 attacks, which left nearly 3,000 people dead, government agencies such as the FBI declared that Islamic threats are the most serious international threats to US interests. They use another T word, but for the sake of YouTube, I'm only going to use the word threat in this video. Government agencies and actors would then lie to justify their actions in the Middle East. For instance, on February 5th, 2003, Colin Powell would justify the invasion of Iraq, which would begin on March 19th, by saying this to us.
Let the world know what Saddam Hussein is really up to. I cannot tell you everything that we know, but what I can share with you, when combined with what all of us have learned over the years, is deeply troubling. What you will see is an accumulation of facts and disturbing patterns of behavior. The facts in Iraq's behavior demonstrate that Saddam Hussein and his regime have made no effort to disarm as required by the international community. Indeed, the facts and Iraq's behavior show that Saddam Hussein and his regime are concealing their efforts to produce more weapons of mass destruction. They were trying to clean up the area to leave no evidence behind of the presence of weapons of mass destruction. And they can claim that nothing was there, and the inspectors can look all they want and they will find nothing. This effort to hide things from the inspectors is not one or two isolated events. Quite the contrary. This is part and parcel of a policy of evasion and deception that goes back 12 years, a policy set at the highest levels of the Iraqi regime.
Now let's be clear, there were no WMDs in Iraq. This was a lie. He was not holding up anthrax in the bottle he held up. Our governments then used this to detain over 700 people without due process in Guantanamo Bay, and to this day there are still 30 detainees there. While this has dropped from around 60 about 2 years ago, some of these people have been held since 2002 without trial, over 20 years. This invasion led to 4,800 dead and 32,000 wounded in the American coalition. Another 3,600 contractors were killed, while 43,000 were wounded. On the Iraqi side, anywhere from 34,000 to 71,000 were killed. However, this is not all the documented deaths from violence, as it is estimated that anywhere up to 1 million people were killed between March 2003 and August 2007, if we include civilians. Remember, they lied to us about WMDs, and then got up to 344 times the amount of people killed on 9/11. If you've been watching this channel, you know we know the truth. They always planned to invade 7 countries in 5 years, even if that country had nothing to do with 9/11. As the timeline expanded on this plan at the end of the Bush era and the beginning of the Obama presidency, the government widened its reach and shifted its priorities. In 2009, the Department of Homeland Security reported that white supremacy is the US's biggest threat for domestic terror, and it was met with harsh criticism. Conservatives blasted the department for defining terror threats too broadly. The report was titled, "Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate Fueling Resurgence in Radicalization and Recruitment," named white supremacists, radical anti-abortionists, and a few disgruntled veterans as most susceptible to recruitment by extremist groups or to harboring resentment that may lead to domestic threats. Now they have expanded the threat to not just radical anti-abortionists, but just about any anti-abortionist. Heck, if you think sleeping around might be dangerous to your health, you might just end up on one of these lists, investigated, and potentially unable to fly on a plane.
Women in the service of male supremacy, exploring female-supported extreme misogyny on mainstream social media platforms. And then there's a bunch of blah, 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 blah. Stop there. The algorithm-curated recommendation discovery feeds of any social media app may have served you up a tweet from the notorious manosphere influencer Andrew Tate lamenting the purported abominable state of masculinity in the West, or a video from the whatever podcast mocking the body count that is the number of sexual partners someone has had of the unforgivably emancipated modern woman.
After 9/11, Bush created the no-fly list, and it has been used to silence Americans ever since. We know they have abused this system before. Even back in early 2002, it was being reported that the no-fly list was being used to stop mostly priests, elderly nuns, Green Party campaign operatives, left-wing journalists, right-wing activists, and people affiliated with Arab or Arab American groups. There are many examples, and people are still suffering from this issue today. One man was put on the list because he refused to become an informant. Another example of abuse was Ted Cruz being delayed in 2004 after being put on the list. And after the Dems got back in power in 2021, the House Homeland Security chair argued that Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley, who they claimed are part of the Big T, should again be put on a no-fly list. This is a sitting member of the Senate who has not been sanctioned by the relevant body. Around the same time, there was this whole issue where parents attending school meetings were labeled as domestic threats by the DOJ for speaking out against what was being taught in schools. It will honestly be no surprise to me when members and guests of the Whatever podcast and similar podcasts start being put on these lists. However, the steps the government will take will not stop there. We already know that the government can violate your due process rights and get away with it. After all, Obama murdered a 16-year-old in another country and was never held accountable. Even if the government won't take it that far for now, though there have been a number of questionable deaths over the past 2 decades, there's a number of ways they can harass you and ruin your life before it gets that far. We are living in dangerous times and at a crossroad. Even those who think we are not will eventually get burned, just like many did concerning the whole Israel-Palestine issue over the last 3 months. Some of the people who thought they could do no wrong have now been cancelled by the establishment. Whether they were actually right or wrong, I will not argue in this video, but what I will say is many of these people refused to speak out when other people were banned before them. Whether I agree or disagree with these people, they should have the right to have their voices heard without fear of threats, especially from the power brokers in our society.
As a man, I am only responsible for what I say.
And even those who think they can get away with always repeating the accepted talking points will one day find themselves cancelled as the talking points change. Either that or there will be a day where they break as the propaganda gets more and more ridiculous. But if we allow them to continue, 2 + 2 will one day equal 5. It is not like they haven't tried something like this before. At this point, anyone talking about these things or reporting on them is, in my opinion, taking a serious risk. But a simple like or share can sometimes be the thing that makes all the difference. And it is really the only way to beat the algorithm. This domino effect is how we have been able to stave off some of the more abusive moves by the Department of Homeland Security and FBI, and it is why I've decided to start making videos again after 4 years. Speaking out is the only way we will prevent the West from falling into the hellhole those in power want for us.
Guys, we're on the chopping block here. They're coming for us, boys. In 2024, we are going to mobilize.